take Cabinet through where we are, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that Cabinet members may have. The report itself, and I won't repeat a lot of detail in there, paragraphs 1.1 to 1.5 give some background to the project. In terms of previous Cabinet decisions, in December 2012, the Cabinet considered some initial community feedback, and they also considered at that time a separate report on the work of strategic leisure into a feasibility study for a new pool for the district located in the vicinity of Hyde. The decision of the Cabinet in December 2012 was to accept the findings of strategic leisure, and that project for the pool should be linked with the wider Princess Parade project and taken forward as one holistic project for the Princess Parade site. Moving on from there, during February and March of 2013, there was a second community stakeholder event where feedback was given, and that included this was prepared by GVA, our consultants, and that included a project website, a Saturday market stall consultation in the High Street, an exhibition in the local library, an evening drop-in session at the local primary school, and various discussions with stakeholders. As a result of that, I fed back to Cabinet in July 2013, and Cabinet resolved to continue with the project, and that further work be done particularly around the relationship with the linked sites to Princess Parade, because GVA said a lot of comments came from people that they didn't quite understand how pieces of the jigsaw fitted together. What's happened since July is GVA and Strategic Leisure have both separately done pieces of work for us. The first thing we've asked GVA, Strategic Leisure to do is to look at the costs for a new pool construction. Now, Cabinet members will recall that the indicative construction costs, excluding certain elements for a new pool constructed in a traditional way, were just under the £12 million mark. Rachel Fowler, who's one of the directors from Strategic Leisure, contacted me and said there is a new model which she confirmed Sport England were supportive of as a general concept, which is called an ARC model, and it is specifically designed to meet the budget pressures that local authorities find themselves under in terms of swimming pool and leisure provision. So I asked Strategic Leisure to do some work on that with a view to the ARC model, which I'll come on to in a moment, bearing in mind that Cabinet had approved a minimum facility mix for a sustainable pool for the next 25 to 30 years. And Rachel Fowler at Strategic Leisure did that piece of work. And what that piece of work did, and the full report is report leader, is the ARC model was considered, it stands for Affordable Recreation Centre. And there are two basic models, two different models for ARC. One is the base model, but the base model departs from the minimum facility mix, and the base model does not have a pool, a learner pool, large enough to enable swimming to take place if there is an event in the main pool, and it also didn't have the studio, which was part of the base facility mix. However, the second model that ARC offer is called the enhanced model, and the enhanced model meets the minimum facility mix and exceeds it in small part. The report picks out the basic provision costs of those models, the base model being 5.95 million and the enhanced model being 7.5 million. There are significant exceptions to what's included in that price, though, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But the conclusion of strategic leisure was that the base model would not meet the approved minimum facility mix, and that the enhanced model would exceed the approved facility mix, and it would come in around about £5 million cheaper than a traditional construction swimming pool. And as I say, the full strategic leisure report is attached as Appendix 1. What I then did was in agreement with yourself, Leader, is I asked GVA to take the strategic leisure report and to consider that in the wider remit in terms of the Princess Parade project and the Leeds development sites. Now, GVA have done a detailed piece of work which is appended as Appendix 2 to the report, and I think it is just worth, because there's been a lot of feedback into me, and I'm sure members as well. I would like to just quote a small section of the report if I may. Chris Hall, the lead consultant for GVA, says costs for a core leisure centre building were provided by Strategic Leisure, retained as advisors by the council. Cost estimates were provided. It is noted that the costs had no external work, site services and infrastructure, all car park included, and assumed good ground conditions. It's worth pausing there, because Strategic Leisure were very clear. They were just briefed to tell us what a pool would cost without any of the site or extraordinary site costs. Chris Hall goes on to say, such a facility would require external works, and the history of Princess Parade site as aggregate extraction, landfill and location of canal dredging material suggests that special foundations would be required. Additional advice on structural requirements were sought from URS, and estimates of cost were sought from Davis Langdon, who are now called ACOM. The report then goes on to make various assumptions around additional costs, which include £1.125 million in terms of foundation, piling foundation, parking area and special foundation for a pool, and £581,000 for a school for similar things, and an additional £500,000 for disposal of contaminants as well. So GVA basically took the Strategic Leisure report and did some work on it. They then came up with two housing scenarios for consideration. One was the provision of 12 luxury detached houses or thereabouts, and the other was for 36 townhouses. And it's very clear in the GPA report that a small and limited number of houses would assist in bridging the gap to fund the whole project, even with the reduced swimming pool costs. So what does that leave us with? It leaves us with a position where, given certain allowances for extraordinary site costs, and given that this is a high-level review, the conclusion of GVA is, and this is right at the end of their report, Leader, that there is a potential capital receipt for all the linked sites, including 36 townhouses on Princess Parade, of 11.35 million, and there are costs, including those elements I highlighted, indicative of 13.3 million, which leaves you with a £1.95 million funding gap. What GVA obviously didn't take into account, which is part of the ongoing sort of swimming pool issue, is the Nichols Quarry Section 106 commitments, which total £3.2 million, less the £12,000 or thereabouts that we've spent on the feasibility work from Strategic Leisure. So we do have a position where we have some more detail on GVA. From GVA, I would stress it is relatively high level still. They've sought specialist advice on some of the issues around site-specific costs, which is probably as far as they could go at this point. In terms of other issues to bring to members' attention, as you will be all well aware, we have engaged the services of a company called Edwards Harvey, who are a Kent-based firm, to assist us with the publicity around the project. One thing that was clear from Strategic Leisure and GVA's different viewpoints is that a combined new pool and new school complex on the site, there was a difference in opinion around east and west. Strategic Leisure simply looked at it from where would a swimming pool work best on its own, and their view was the western end of the site adjoining, at our western end, adjoining the golf course end. GVA had a much wider view, which was around if you're doing a combined school and pool and an element of housing, how would the site be best put together, and their view was that the combined pool and school site would be at the eastern end, abutting the existing play area. So what we asked Edwards Harvey to do was to gather public responses from the community in relation to that question. As you know, there was an event on the 23rd of May at Seabrook Church Hall, and I have a verbal update on what took place there. 320 members of the public visited, approximately. There were 141 completed questionnaires. The expressions for the eastern end were 28, the expressions for the western end were 32, so pretty much even. Of email responses, there were 35 emails, and to quote the email back to us, approximately 50-50 in terms of positive and negative comments. Some people used the emails to express an opinion on east and west rather than voting, and there were 4 expressions for the west and 3 for the east, so again, give or take 50-50. So that's all the information. The recommendations I have in the report for Cabinet to consider are to endorse the revised facility model report from Strategic Leisure, to endorse the principles in the GVA report, and importantly, subject to capital receipts from the development sites being allocated towards the scheme, that Cabinet confirms in its capacity as landowner that the ARC enhanced model is the route you want to go down, that we should limit as landowner the allocation of housing on our ownership at Princess Grove to 36 townhouses, and that the pool and school should be adjoined, whether it be at the eastern or western end, that the two should be adjoined to simply help achieve efficiencies of infrastructure costs. That we take the views of the public again, and there's a second exhibition on the 5th of June, and that you authorise me to continue with the project as you direct and report back at the next appropriate time in the process. That's what I would say by way of instruction, Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chambers. Okay, it's open to members for comment, questions. Councillor Dearden.
Yeah, I'd ask for some leniency, because as a representative in Hythe, I think there should be some deference to the fact that it is happening in Hythe. We've all had some correspondence from Jim Martin, who is a professional person of a chartered surveyors who's raised a number of issues. And I've also had some emails, or a email from one of our backbenchers, David Owen, who's in the back of the hall at the moment. So that's the situation with regard to looking at what people have been saying other than the official reports that we've had. My concern effectively is, well, firstly, I do want a swimming pool for Hythe. My preference would be the existing site. One of the things Jim Martin brought through was that he'd put forward proposals where you could have had one on the existing site with 40 flats above. I just want to touch upon that and understand that that has nowhere to go. I've never been in favour of the Nichols Quarry position, because I think it's too far out of Hythe. And whereas I would like Princess Parade to remain as it is, if at all possible, I accept pragmatically that if there is no alternative, I would support a pool on the Princess Parade site. Now, that's the background. The situation is that by any calculation, there is a shortfall. On our calculation, 1 point something million, on Mr. Martin's 10 million. There are assumptions based on 2012 figures. There are assumptions based on the viability of selling the houses where we are in a buoyant market and what's going to happen if we don't have a buoyant market. There are assumptions about the Eversley site, and there are no assumptions as such that we can take on board with regard to the site itself as to piling, the kind of measures that we would have to take in order to make this site safe to be used. So that concerns me. What also concerns me is the fact of ensuring that if this development goes forward, we can ensure that this is the only development that goes onto that site by way of the linear park, by way of the school if the county wished to become involved, and by way of the swimming pool. And so I would want some form of assurance that we would be looking to some form of restrictive covenant or village green status that would prevent any further development on that site. That's the first question. The second question is, how are we going to address a shortfall which on present assumptions, which if they come forward leaves us with 1.9 million or thereabouts, but if the assumptions are not correct, the site proves more difficult than we expected, or that the market just disappears and you can't sell 36 townhouses and you can't build on the Eversley site and all the other issues. Where are we going to find the shortfall? What about the question of inflation and interest, the question of it seems to me that people suggest that you can build an aircraft carrier for 3 billion and it suddenly turns into 5 billion. You know, there's that kind of underestimate, which of course again Mr. Martin has raised. Points that have been raised by David Owen again are that the maths just don't add up. There's no question of what's to be done about the ancient monument. There's no question of what's going to be done about overtopping in the event of a storm. This is going to be vulnerable to flooding if that happens. That may not be a realistic question. I mean, we may be able to put flood measures in, but it's still a question that one has to ask nowadays with the global warming situation and the fact that water levels are beginning to increase. And he's raised the issue of the deficit and other situations. And the other thing about Nichols Quarry is, whereas we're expecting money from Nichols Quarry, it's not money in the hand. The only money that's going to come out of Nichols Quarry is when they get their act into place, and I put forward the point that I objected to the development of Nichols Quarry, as did Hyde Town Council. But once that takes off, we're not going to get the 3.2 million until part the way down the scheme, and we've already had a Phoenix company. Now, thanks for the leniency in that I wanted to put those points, but there are a number of questions about overestimate, about how we're going to handle the site, how we're going to protect the site so that nobody else comes in for development. And the other aspect, of course, is if it's in the west, it gets close to the Imperial, and I'm sure the public will connect into it and say, well, look, if you're going to put it in the west, what's going to happen with the Hotel Imperial is already beginning to suggest, despite what they said in the past, that they would like to put forward a potential. I mean, that they're not saying we want to develop it at the moment, but colloquially in the town, we're aware that the golf club is not doing tremendously well and that type of thing. It may not happen. And I was a supporter of the Imperial development. So, but I don't want to see loads of houses on the Imperial golf course. So I know we can't do anything about that. They've only expressed interest. I know it's a planning issue, but if the development is in the west, it's more likely to connect in with something on the golf course, whereas if it's in the east, it's more likely not to. So, and it's going to be where the school is. So it's a lot of questions, but as a representative for Hythe, I think those are the questions that people in Hythe are going to ask, and why can't it be on the present side?
Exactly.
Oh, well, thank you for that. We'll now take the next half an hour to have the replies to those questions. Thank you.
I will attempt to, I think I've got them all covered in terms of notes, but if at the end I've missed any, I apologise in advance. It's not deliberate, and I'm sure you'll pick me up on anything I do miss. First of all, why not the current pool site? Cabinet, when it met on the 18th of December 2012, considered the report of strategic leisure, and they do give a summary of what their view was at the time. And I think the key thing is, people have quite rightly said you could build a facility on the current pool site. Technically, of course you could, there's one there at the moment, so it can be done, no question about that. But don't forget, the work that Strategic Leisure were asked to do was to consider what is the minimum facility mix for a sustainable facility for the future. Now, that was their first question. And the first principle that Cabinet agreed in December 2012 was, this is the minimum facility mix you need for a pool for the district that's sustainable. Their brief wasn't what can you fit on a current pool site. The brief was what is the minimum mix. Then where can it go within a 2.5 mile radius of the current pool site, because the Section 106 money from Nichols Quarry is restricted to the vicinity of Hythe. And the view was that 2.5 miles from the current pool site goes quite a long way. So that's the background. What Strategic Leisure said, and I'll repeat this, is existing Hythe swimming pool site. The disadvantages of this site is that it is too small and cannot provide for both future facility needs and the appropriate infrastructure, i.e. car parking. Although technically accessible, there are already car parking issues on and around this site. Development of a larger facility is likely to increase usage levels, and therefore traffic to and from the facility would impact on both traffic levels and parking requirements. So that's one point. There are two other points. If you do not utilise the current pool site in terms of potential capital receipt, there is the potential that funding is even more of an issue. GVA's view is that the current pool site could generate a capital receipt of 4.5 million. So there's a capital receipt coming in from there as well. And I think the third issue is as well, and this is one that quite often gets overlooked. If the pool is elsewhere than the current pool site, and if everything aligns and it works properly, you don't lose pool provision even temporarily to the district. If you close the current pool, the likelihood is it will be closed for a significant amount of time. So there will be no facility, or one of those temporary facilities which aren't quite the same, but there will be an issue there. So those two, capital receipt and closure of the pool business, need to be remembered. But the key issue is, for a sustainable pool to meet future needs, the experts we commissioned are of the view that the current site is simply not large enough. And that's the position Cabinet accepted on the 18th of December 2012. So that's the first question. In terms of assurances with regard to development costs, Mr. Martin's emailed me, he's emailed the members, and I've been copied in, and we've had more than one email exchange going back over the months. Mr. Martin's quite right to raise them. All I can do is repeat that this is predominantly a high level report, and what GVA did, and it's probably worth just flagging this again, is excuse me 1 second. Additional advice on structural requirements was sought from URS, and estimates of costs were sought from Davies Langdon. It is assumed that a 3,910 square metre facility would require piling foundations in addition to standard foundations, given reported ground conditions. an approach that assumed a 4,000 square metre parking area and its associated foundations was costed. Costs for the school were based on a per square metre typical costs and also the application of foundation requirements that respond to conditions known at Princess Parade. Although the costs are not based on specific designs, they are based on typical approaches and the scale of activity required. A further allowance for the disposal of contaminants required following excavations was also identified. Now, I was anticipating questions on this, so I've also looked at a bit of GVA's background and their associated companies, and it's probably worth highlighting this. GVA employed 5,700 real estate professionals in 110 offices across 20 countries. They are a large company, and I can give no assurances in relation to what the property market is going to do. Nobody can. I can't give any assurances in relation to inflation. Nobody can. But all I can do is say these are experts in their area, and we have taken their views. I've also looked at ACOM, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and I apologise to them in advance if I'm not. They have a similar wide-reaching professional network, and some of their related projects on the website are the 2002 Commonwealth Games City of Manchester Stadium and Sports City, the 2010 Greenpoint Stadium in South Africa for the World Cup, and the 2010 Moses Mabhida Stadium for the South Africa World Cup. Yeah. So while we are taking these costs at high level and at face value at the moment, we have to, I hope, be comforted that we are dealing with high level companies with a lot of experience. Now, I can't give the assurances you asked for, but if I gave them, I think it would be wrong, and no one would believe me anyway. I think it's, we have to deal with what we know at the time and not things we can't predict. In terms of protection, with regard to the elements of the site that aren't being considered for this scheme, if members were minded to consider the Princess Parade housing scenario number 2 in the GVA report, it basically shows a pool at the eastern end next to the school with a school playing field, then some public open space, then you're at the halfway point of the council's ownership where the footpath comes across. Then there is an element of housing, and then there is probably over a third of our overall ownership, which is open space on that plan. If the question was what could we do to ensure that that isn't developed, there are lots of things we could do. You mentioned Village Green, you mentioned restricted covenant. I know you're well aware of case law in central London yourself that is still used to protect very, very valuable real estate from development today. So, if members are minded to do that, there are things that can be done. The Cabinet recommendation asks for you to confirm as landowner that 36 is your cap on housing. If members do not feel that is a strong enough position, it's very easy for members to pass resolutions and instruct officers to do the right things at the appropriate time, so the community has the reassurance that this is not the thin end of the wedge, for want of a better phrase. You were quite right, Councillor Dearden, to point out that the Nichols Quarry money is not in the hand. No, it's phased. It's phased over dwellings completed. It's phased over a long period of time. But the council's always known that. And that is the situation, the financial reality, whether the pool is Princess Parade, Nichols Quarry, current site, New Romney, not at all. That money only comes in when those triggers are met in the Section 106 agreement. So whatever happens, the council, and it's one for the finance colleagues probably more than me, the council will be faced, regardless of other issues, with cash flow management over a period of time. But that's always been a situation from when I've been at the council. So I hope that explains where we are on that. With regard to the public feeling with regard to the golf course and the Hyde Imperial and development creep, I think is the phrase I would use. I mean, the Hyde Imperial have responded to the planning authority in terms of its core sites, and they've simply included their ownership in the core sites process, which any landowner is perfectly entitled to do. It's not an area that I'm personally involved in, but I know some of the basics. What I can say is I joined in July 2008, and in my first week with the previous leader, Councillor Bliss, I had a meeting with GSE where they were asking if we would be involved in a joint development or joint consideration of our sites. The steer from Councillor Bliss in 2008 was no, we won't. Within the last 9 months, I've had a meeting with the current leader, Councillor Monk. The same issues were raised and the same steer was given. So whilst there is an adjoining open space, which is a golf course currently, and I've heard similar comments around how well the golf course is doing or otherwise. I'm operating within a steer from the leader and obviously the previous leader at the time, and there has never been any steer to me that this should move forward as a project jointly with the landowners of the golf course. And I think, given what I said about members, if they were minded to protect the rest of our site that we don't use for these facilities that are currently under discussion, hopefully that will give you some comfort, and the people who have contacted you some comfort in relation to those questions. I think, very quickly, Leader, with regard to the ancient monument, I do have a meeting scheduled in with English Heritage together with Susan Priest. The reason that meeting hasn't taken place is because, of course, Cabinet could choose to make an alternative resolution tonight, so we just penciled it in with them for a couple of weeks' time.
Very much. Councillor Love.
Thank you very much, Leader. And can I start by saying that the summary that Mr. Chambers has presented about the feedback so far, and I recognise that this is something which is continuing at the moment, but so far certainly seems to accord with the experience that I had at the consultation event on Friday, both in terms of which end would be preferable for the new swimming pool, where there seem to be well-argued views pointing to both ends, and also incidentally to the discussion that we were actually having about a year ago about the principle of putting Hyde's new swimming pool on the Prince's Parade site. And that was perhaps best illustrated at around about 10 to 7 on Friday in Seabrook, when I was having a very fruitful discussion with a couple of people who were clearly very passionate about not wanting Hyde's new swimming pool to go on Prince's Parade. And that prompted two other people to move fairly rapidly across the room to join in the conversation, explaining why it was so important that we do seize the initiative of getting a new swimming pool. And there was a debate that continued probably for about 20 minutes, I think, because I think it overran the time that the caretaker was trying to come in to close the exhibition hall, between two groups of residents who were equally passionate and equally put their cases, I felt, extremely well. I certainly found it a very instructive experience. But I think it does illustrate the, the issues that this cabinet took on board last July, I think it was the 23rd of July meeting, when we agreed to proceed to the stage that we're at today. And there are very passionately held views on both sides. And I think one of the things that the consultation event last week illustrated to me was that there isn't necessarily a shared understanding of just where we are in the process. I know that there was one gentleman in particular who said to me that suddenly the discussion was around whether the pool should be at the western end or the eastern end, and he asked me if he missed something. And you know, I suppose the straight answer is, well, perhaps he did, because there was full coverage of where we were last year, and I remember actually being quoted during the cabinet debate, or after the cabinet debate, being quoted in the Herald for the comments that I made, which were that I felt there was a way of taking on board much of the feedback that we had from the 2012-2013 consultation about people very much wanting a new swimming pool. That was the single most popular issue that people had fed into that, about wanting to protect open space at Prince's Parade, about wanting to ensure that this wasn't the thin end of the wedge and there wasn't suddenly going to be blocks of flats on Prince's Parade. And I said at the time in that debate that I thought there was a way of achieving probably 90% of those objectives, and you know, putting them together into something which provides a swimming pool, but which also protects open space. And certainly I feel that the outline that we're working along today does just that. Now, I'm also conscious that there are a lot of people who are perhaps a little sceptical about the protection of the open space. And picking up on Councillor Dearden's point, you know, I hope that we can, I'll make a proposal in just a moment about this, because I hope that we can perhaps make clearer part of our ambition of actually creating new parkland space. And this is, you know, there isn't parkland space there at the moment. There's a former landfill site with at least 2 lots of dredgings from the canal on top of it, and it's not the most attractive site. It is, on the face of it looks like a wild space. And I compare this with going back a number of years to the old Lower Sandgate Road in Folkestone, and in particular the western end of that, which is now a managed wild space. It's not a formal garden, and that equally I think would be out of place on Prince's Parade, but it is a managed wild space rather than just a wild space that's overgrown in that particular case with brambles and various other types of planting that simply meant it couldn't fully be enjoyed by the public. And you know, this is, and let's be quite clear. I mean, we have a pretty outstanding track record in the Lower Lees Coastal Park. You know, we turned what was just neglected space into space which has been highlighted by other local authorities and other agencies across the country. I remember reading about 5 years ago a plan for something called wild space, as it happens, being put forward by Havering Council, London Borough of Havering, together with a number of their partnership agencies, that actually highlighted Shepway's coastal park as being the kind of model that they aspire to. And so I think we have a track record there. We have a track record in the upgrading of the Royal Military Canal. Again, going back a few years, the central Hythe section of the Royal Military Canal really is a pretty outstanding public space now. And I think it's sad that the eastern end of the Royal Military Canal falls well short of the sort of quality that we have in the centre. I think there were a number of issues that came out from the consultation, and some of them needed teasing out, because I think the fact that we didn't have a sort of shared understanding of where we are in the process meant that some of the issues were quite difficult to get to. But I was struck by one lady, for instance, who was talking to me, and I'm sorry to sort of go on a little bit about this, but I think these individual points are quite important. And there's one lady who spoke to me who's, it wasn't her claim to fame actually, but I was particularly impressed with it. She had walked from Dungeness to Ramsgate along the kind of coastal area, which I thought was very impressive. And the one concern for her was that she didn't want to have to walk that route in future, feeling hemmed in by a 6-foot-high wall alongside the footpath. Now, I think that's a really, that's one of the kind of important messages coming from this, because again, I stand by what I said in July last year, but I think it's possible to manage the parkland space in such a way that it gives that open space feeling that we can reconcile many of the objectives that people have in the way forward. I was also struck that a number of residents were concerned, again picking up on something that Councillor Dearden's raised, concerned about whether funding arrangements would be adequate and whether actually this would have some kind of impact on the council tax. And again, I think this administration has a pretty good record there. I mean, we've actually cut the council tax over the last couple of years, and I think we've demonstrated that we're not an administration that just goes into something and says, oh well, never mind, the taxpayer can pick up the bill. That's not any part of this proposal. It won't happen if it doesn't stack up. And I think we need to emphasise that. But the one point, and this is my final point, you'll be pleased to hear, Leader. The one point that I do want to pick up on is this issue about how we can protect this new parkland space. I mean, I think that would be a fantastic proposal to create new parkland on something open to the public, on something which is currently a piece of private land and indeed a former landfill site. And I do think that we can give further assurance, and I think we can make clearer our ambition to protect that parkland. And I would like to propose that we add in the recommendations at number 4, that we add a further recommendation, further resolution, 4D, which would come in as 4D, that, and the wording would be that at the appropriate time, a legally binding covenant be drawn up to protect the proposed parkland and open space from any future development proposals not directly related to the site's leisure and educational objectives. I think we are able at this stage to signal our intent that we do not want to see housing or blocks of flats outside of the proposals that are in front of us built on that site. And again, we've actually got quite a good track record here. I mean, I speak as the person who blocked, by a number of measures, the proposal for blocks of flats on Folkestone seafront when they were put forward. So I'm not proposing anything radically different from that. But I think we do, not only do we want to show our own ambition to create new parkland space, but we also want to give tougher reassurances that that's what we have in mind here. Now, the reason I talk about being related to the leisure or educational facilities, I mean, what I don't want to find is that we put some covenant on, which means that if the school comes along at a future stage and says, we'd like to put some solar panels on the roof to help our energy costs, that we suddenly fall foul of a covenant that we just put in place. I think it's got to be very directly related, though, and certainly I would not wish to see housing. And frankly, people raised this with me on Friday as well about the golf course. There are planning protections in place on that land at the moment, and frankly, any change of the status there would have to get past quite a number of us who I think would, certainly I can speak for myself, would be gravely concerned to see blocks of flats being proposed for any other part of the seafront area. I think we do value the open space, but I think what I would like to see is the opportunity for the leisure centre, which Hythe needs, and indeed the whole district needs. And I share Councillor Dearden's view that sticking it 2 miles out down on a busy road to the west was not the smartest proposal. So Leader, I shall wrap up, and I believe I do have a seconder for those additional words.
Before we do that, I need to go through a bit of procedure.
Well, only actually you don't actually have the report moved and seconded yet at all.
I recognise.
So if it actually assists the debate, you might want to just hold those words until the end of the debate, and then actually see what actually people actually want to move. If that actually sort of would assist in actually how you go forward. So we've got the words. We can hang on to those until we actually get here to see whether actually anybody moves this at all.
I thank you, through you, Leader, to the Chief Executive for pointing out the procedural issue that the rest of it hadn't yet been moved, and it's probably premature to move any further before we have a fuller debate. But I flagged up my intention to wish to.
Exactly that. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collier.
Yes, Leader. I'd like to just follow up on the question of restrictive covenants. I mean, my understanding is that the council would retain the land which was used as parkland. The council would retain, presumably, the leisure complex. So the only land of which we would actually be disposing would be that which was for the school and also for housing. So I just wanted really to be sure that the intention was to retain the parkland. So in consequence, there wouldn't obviously be any need to have a restrictive covenant on that. If the intention is to have a restrictive covenant on the areas we are proposing to dispose of, then obviously I would be supportive of that. Another part, I'd like to just follow on from the impressive record of the consultants for having sort of overseen or arranged the construction of these Olympic stadium or stadia. My question is, would it be possible to go back to them and see how the estimate and the actual figures compare? Because as a fellow Charter Surveyor with Jim Martin, I can see and totally understand where he's coming from. As a member for a Folkestone ward, I wouldn't want to see my constituents having to support a shortfall. And I'd also like at that point to just mention the Kent County Council, the provision of the new school and the Kent County Council land, will they be separated out because I certainly wouldn't want to see Shepway District Council taxpayers funding a new school. And equally, I would suggest it is unlikely that Kent County Council taxpayers, and I appreciate that we're all one and both, but I wouldn't expect that the County Council would want to lightly give up any profit from any land sales that they may have.
Thank you, Councillor Collier. I know that Councillor Love wants to come back, but I would just make one observation. The facility is a district facility. It's not specifically a Hythe facility. It is available for the whole district. Councillor Love.
Leader, I think I'm a cynical sort of person, and even if this land is retained by this council, I still think there is a need for a legally binding covenant. You know, this administration may have a very clear ambition to create new parkland. Who knows what future administrations some years down the road may have, and you know, I wouldn't trust a future administration any more than I think some of the public would, so I still think it would be necessary.
Thank you for that. I'm a chairman of a sports recreation ground, and Swingfield Parish Council are the custodian trustees, and probably that's a way forward. Councillor Dearden.
Yes, I'll be very briefly. Just supporting what Councillor Love has just said. Not that I'm cynical, but that it is entirely possible and appropriate for landowners to covenant their own land for the benefit of other people, and what that would clearly do is tie the hands of whoever is either the future administration here or the future landowner. Because as we know, even with planning protections, things can change. Restrictive covenants are much more difficult to get out of once they're there. So that's just one observation, Leader. The second one, in relation to the work that's been done by GVA and the company they've commissioned, what I will go back and do is ask some more detailed questions on their assumptions in relation to the extraordinary site costs, because their report is very much a summary. There will be some more detail that sits behind that, and I will obtain whatever that detail is, and I will circulate it to members accordingly and put it at the appropriate point on the council's website.
You know, I'd like to come back on that, because in actual fact it's quite important to me, because if they did oversee these projects, they must have had estimated figures, and they must have had actual figures, and it would be a useful guide to us to be able to see just how close they were.
Councillor Dearden.
Yes, thank you. At one point, just following on from that, they're running on figures that are a year to 2 years out of date, but let's pass that by. And on the covenant point, it's a question of benefit and burden, and whether there is retention of land and that type of thing. And it's not absolutely binding from the point of view that you can always go to the Lands Tribunal or its equivalent to seek a discharge of the covenant, but I've never come across one being done yet, so doubtful. I support Councillor Love on his proposed amendment, because that's the amendment I was going to put in roughly the same words. And when the motion is put, I would want to also look to add in paragraph 4 after the word allocated and before the word towards, the words and practicably available. But that's a matter for debate, and whether I have a second.
Okay, again, we will hold that till we finish the discussion, and we'll come back to those. Thank you. Councillor Belcourt.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I share Councillor Love's view, and when it becomes the time, I will actually second that report. I was at the consultation. There were a lot of positives. There were a lot of concerns. I wouldn't like to see anything built on the golf course, and obviously that would be a matter of planning in the future. But nothing would, in my view, I certainly wouldn't support it. I wouldn't support any more than 36 houses on the site either. And I do think that we need the open spaces and parkland that are managed well, like the coastal park. We have listened to quite a lot of the consultation. We have got another one coming up. I think this project has to go forward. We desperately need the school. We desperately need the new pool because we're just about at the end of its life. And I think this is the time that this council needs to take this project forward and see it through.
Thank you, Councillor Belcourt. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I was very impressed actually with the responses to Councillor Dearden and Councillor Love, and that's made me feel much happier about the situation. I too was at the consultation and either supporting or around Councillor Love at the same time. And again, we had a number of people who were very, very supportive of the project, and those who were extremely against it. In fact, one person actually told me, talking about the golf course, one person actually said to me at the consultation, build it on the golf course. And I thought that was quite an incredible comment to actually make. Maybe I should declare an interest in that. I was a member of the golf course, but it's lapsed now because I haven't had the time to go and play, but I wouldn't want to see the golf course go, of course. But I just want to take a wider view on this. I think the detail has been talked about, but I want to take a sort of more of a district view on this because, as the leader just mentioned, it is for the district, and I think certainly in planning terms, you've got to look at the benefit that it has to the district as a whole, not necessarily just for Hythe or Hythe and New Romney. It is in addition to Folkestone Sports Centre. Somebody was telling me at the consultation that there are 500 young people swimming at Hythe Pool, and that 700, well, I was told 500, and that if that should close, where do they go? Because Folkestone would not be able to accommodate them. So from that point of view, I think it is important that we keep a pool going in Hythe somewhere or another. Like Councillor Dearden and Councillor Love, I was not keen on the pool going to the Nichols Quarry, and again from some of the feedback and consultations, it's been made quite clear that it is too far out, and that should the pool be built before the majority of the housing, it was not a very nice area for people, especially young people, to go and visit. So I mean, if you take the population of Shepway, around about 100,000, 108,000, the objections to this actual development, about 1,000. It's a very small minority of this population. And I think, I mean, you have to look back. I did explain to some people actually at the consultation that on planning in particular, if it was an application in my ward that my residents were against, one of the things you have to do as a councillor, and you have to be brave, you have to make, you know, and some people say to me, oh well, you're a councillor, you do this, and we have all this business about what you do and what you can't do and everything else. But I always say to people, you know, you get out there, you go and get your votes, you go and spend all the hours on council business like we do. I am looking at this on a district-wide business, and I think that the district needs it, and I think that the number of objectors is very small in comparison to the district. And I must say also at that consultation, the majority of people who were against it were obviously local residents, and I can understand, I sympathise. People were talking about the loss of their view and all that. I totally and utterly sympathise, but looking at the bigger picture, I think that we need this project to go forward. with and I must say there is obviously a proviso here. If all the jigsaw bits do not come together, then obviously this project is not going to go forward. We've got to KCC, the church, we've got lots of other agencies to consider. And, sorry to go on, each one of those, when the planning application comes in, or for housing development on the various sites, and in fact obviously the development of Princess Parade, each application has to come in as a planning application. Local residents, everybody else has the opportunity to make comments. All the other agencies will be consulted. So there's a long process to go through. But I believe that the overall concept is what we should go for. And somebody actually said to me at that consultation, bravo for Shepway to actually have the vision to do this.
Thank you, Councillor Hornsby. Councillor Tilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I should probably be fairly brief. I'm delighted that we're being filmed. If I'd have known that, I'd have brought a leading lady. I've got a couple of technical questions which I shall ask Mr. Chambers, if I may, but I would start by saying that nothing I've heard this afternoon I would dissent from, and most of the issues I might have raised would be very ably raised by my colleagues. I've got three separate questions arising out of the report, if I may ask Mr. Chambers. I'll ask them all together. The first of these is we're looking at this enhanced ARC model, and the Strategic Leisure Report, which is Appendix A, estimates the capital cost of that at 7.5 million. And that's all in section 119 on page 27. Now that's based on a series of assumptions which are clearly bullet pointed at that same stage, 119, and there's a rather critical assumption sitting in there. Among them assume good ground conditions and no contamination. And so my first of three questions is going to be, are you, Mr. Chambers, in the position to confirm that each and every one of those assumptions has been subject to the most robust testing? Are we at any future stage going to come back and discover that one or more of those assumptions ceases to be valid? That's the first one. The second one, and I go to page 53, this is site option 3B, so we're on the ARC Enhanced again. We've got some cost estimates on page 53, and in those cost estimates, if I can refer to that, we use the term base scheme cost. And I'm going to ask you if you can tell me what exactly does the term base scheme cost mean. It appears in the accompanying assumptions of that section that external works and site services and infrastructure are not included, and I'm intrigued to know why they're not included. And then 431, just a bit further down, also suggests that there's been no allowance made for inflation, etc. And I'm always very dubious about the word etc. in any sort of report. Could you tell me, Mr. Chambers, what exactly is the etc. in this particular case? And my third and final point arises out of letters and emails that I and doubtless colleagues have received, and the point is interesting, and you may be able to answer it, because a number of critics are claiming that the cost figures that are given in the report for the homes and the houses that are earmarked for development in South Road, Eversley Road, and on the existing Seabolt School site are very significantly underestimated. And that is the claim. And if that were the case, then of course the funding gap which Councillor Dearden referred to at the beginning for the Princess Parade developments would of course be appreciably greater than is being suggested here. So I wonder, Mr. Chambers, whether you're in a position to comment on this proposition that there has been a significant underestimation of the cost of those developments. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Leader, and I apologise to Councillor Tilson for having my back to him while I answer, but I do need to look at my notes for his questions. Has there been robust testing of the assumptions on page 27? No, is the answer. As I said earlier, this is a high-level piece of work. The costs that have been estimated come from GVA based on the work that they have done. I will ask GVA for more detail of their assumptions behind those costs above and beyond that which is already included in their report, and I will circulate that and I will include it on the website. With regard to the second question under the base scheme cost, that is simply the phrase that Strategic Leisure have used for the base model and the enhanced model to indicate that it doesn't include the add-ons that they then refer to in terms of car parking and potentially external finishes and that kind of thing. So it's simply making the point that the base scheme cost for the base model and the base scheme cost for the enhanced model are simply for the modular build of the pool itself. Can I tell you what they mean by inflation, etc.? No. I will ask. And I will again come back to all Cabinet members and publish whatever response they give me on the website. With regard to the cost figures for homes on the Prince of Parade site and the linked development sites themselves being significantly underestimated, I can simply reiterate that have taken advice from GVA. They've set out their thoughts on their evaluation basis. I will go back and ask for more detailed information and share that with Cabinet members and put it on the website as soon as I receive it.
Councillor Dearden.
Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, yes, it is for the district, but it does impinge on Hyde, and I know feelings are strong on both sides, and this debate has got to be open to the fact that both points of view are being put. Now, again, Mr. Martin has put his professional reputation on the line because he's written on letterheading from a firm of chartered surveyors, as I understand it, and given that that chartered surveyors has the name Martin in it, I wonder whether he's a business owner as well. But he puts down £1,100 per square metre for the flats has been estimated, and £1,000 per square metre for houses. Their costs are inadequate. The real cost would be £1,700 per square metre for flats and £1,600 per square metre for houses. So we are facing the fact that somebody who is experienced and has expertise in this line has raised an issue. So I would hope that when we come back that we're not being vague, with all the best intention in the world, that we're not being vague and that we do have an ability to give proper answers to these queries, which could lead us down a very expensive line if we don't get it right. Amusingly, in one respect, the pool in Hyde was built to avoid the clutches of Shepway District Council when it was formed in 1972, and that certain councillors who the audience will know as Councillor Capon was very instrumental in getting the pool built before Shepway could get the money from Hyde Borough. So it would be nice if Shepway were to give some more money back to Hyde, and I like that thought. Shouldn't say things like that, should I really? But I mean, the fact is, it's a tremendous opportunity in my view that if we get it right, and to get an open space that will be available, because since 82, when a trench was dug and then refuse from the canal was laid on it, it's not been accessible to the public, and it would be very nice if that area became accessible and that we recognise that it's a long haul before we actually see a swimming pool and accompanying buildings being opened. So I just wanted to make that. On the other point is about profile. Those people who could potentially lose their view as I understand it, the kind of development we're looking at will be low profile, and one of the options available on the ARC model would be to move the machinery that would normally go on the roof into the building itself, which would protect it against the sea, but also remove that unsightly aspect. And I think properly dealt with, further down the line, we could see a great benefit if that is going to happen. I have my reservations, and they still remain, and the people in my constituency, so to speak, have their reservations, and I would like to put those when necessary. But on the whole, subject to the proposed amendments, I will go with it. But I do have that further amendment that I've put forward that I would like to put.
Thank you. Well, we've had a long and in-depth debate on this. Is there any other councillor that wishes to talk on this before I just want to say a couple of things. One of the things about the costs, when the indicative cost came back at 11 million, I was not pleased, and if the cost had stayed at that, we wouldn't be where we are today, because we wouldn't be going forward. As we go forward, we find that truly that our experts have got it wrong, then we will of course reconsider it, because we aren't stupid. I would now like to move the recommendations, taking in both the amendments put by Councillor Love and Councillor Dearden. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Belcourt.
I don't have a seconder to my proposal.
Oh, you don't have to, because I've just had it all done. That's why we did it. Okay. So
can I yes, I recognise that mine is in, and thank you, Lisa, for including those words. Could we just hear the explanation from the other additional words that have been suggested?
Of course you may. Otherwise you might not want to vote on them.
The wording is "and practicably available," and that's trying to establish that we proceed on proper funding that could potentially be available, and by using the word "practicably," that we are looking at serious considerations. The word "allocated," you can allocate something but not necessarily have the funds to allocate. What I'm looking at is allocated and practicably available.
I think it actually is the essence of what we're trying to do. Okay, so with that, proposed by me, seconded by Councillor Belcourt, all in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to item 5. Permanent occupation of non-residential caravans. Oh, well, we just give a pause. If anyone, does anyone want to take a break or just wait?
Well done, Bob.
Just have a quick break. 5 minutes.